G'day, AJ Mahar here. Following my video on what is the vulnerable narcissist, or the difference between the vulnerable and the covert, which you now, if you watch that video, know that they're basically the same, it's just using different words. This video is about the quiet borderline. What is a quiet borderline? What's that mean? And actually, there was a question on Quora, or however you say that, that I answered, I don't know, a while back. Somebody said, is there such a thing as quiet borderline personality disorder? And no, there isn't. Because again, it's like I don't understand where all these questions come from, but I guess they just come from people's experience. And so, great, like I mean, great in the sense that people are searching for this understanding, and I'm here to hopefully help you with that, or on Quora sometimes too. So no, there's no such thing as quiet borderline personality disorder, but there is such a thing as a quiet borderline. So people who have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder have the same core issues, the same either actual or perceived abandonment trauma and or attachment trauma, and they kind of go in hand, those two things, whether it's perceived or actual. And so what does it mean to be a quiet borderline? Well, basically for people that are trying to figure out what these people look like, or are you dealing with a quiet borderline, they will still suffer from extreme mood swings and emotional reactivity and self-harm, and perhaps suicidal ideation, chronic feelings of emptiness, in a lot of cases paranoid ideation, dissociation, lack of identity, not knowing who they are, the same core abandonment, as I said, and attachment trauma and issues of all with BPD, but manifested in the opposite way from the classic acting out, raging borderline. So the major difference is everything by the quiet borderline is acted in on self predominantly, and for the classic acting out borderline, everything is put out onto other. That is the difference between, that's what defines the quiet borderline, is that they act everything in, they turn most everything in. And traits, or what can you look for or expect in a quiet borderline, or person with borderline personality disorder who exhibits it in a quiet, acting in way? These people are also very angry. They are inwardly hostile. They punish themselves primarily by turning everything inward. They use silence and withdrawal to punish others as well, often not knowingly. They have the same black and white thinking as anybody with borderline personality disorder, magical thinking, splitting, idealization, devaluation cycles, lost self, lack of identity, often shifting moods, very sensitive temperament, often they feel very less than, they have a lot of shame, they feel incompetent, maybe not every single one, but a lot of quiet borderlines feel incompetent. Or even if they are competent in a job, they feel incompetent underneath it anyway. And so they often feel broken and unworthy, too broken to be fixed. That's how they feel. It's not true, but they can feel that way. They're triggered easily to dysregulated emotions, as is the acting out borderline. They regress in the same ways. I mean, won't exhibit it the same, but they do have the same triggered regressions, repetition compulsions, acting, experiencing in a dissociated way the past and the here and now, but then not exhibiting it in an acting out way. They have the same fear of abandonment as anybody with borderline personality disorder. Fear of being alone often. They feel, when I say often, I mean most people who are quiet borderlines, right? There's always individual variances in these things. They feel current feelings whatever they're feeling now, they feel like it's always been what they felt and it will always be what they felt, especially when it's really, painful or negative or, um, they just aren't feeling good. In a down mood, it just feels like it's always been that way, always going to be that way, which isn't the case, but it's how they feel. They can be very manipulative. Again, is that so conscious? No, it's usually for most people with BPD and who are quiet borderlines, same as acting out ones. Um, a lot of their manipulation is not done in any really conscious way, but it's a little passive aggressive, and so they may or may not know that they're actually being manipulative. Many know at different times, and many don't know a lot of the time. Um, doesn't really change how you experience it, but that's the way it is for people who are quiet borderlines and or have borderline personality anyway. They have difficulty being close to anyone and fear being alone. So that's that main conundrum in borderline personality disorder. Quiet borderlines experience that just as much as acting out borderlines. They feel disconnected, lonely, alienated. They feel like a victim. They have a victim mindset and mentality because they were once victimized or perceived that they were victimized. And that's still unresolved, and they have arrested emotional development around the age of 2. So they're going to continue to feel that. When they get triggered to emotional dysregulation, which you don't see the same in a quiet borderline, but they still experience that, then they're going to feel very much like they're going to feel the victimization that's unresolved in a dissociative way from the past in the here and now. So they isolate for safety and emotional mood regulation. The quiet borderline does. So too does the acting out sometimes. But they have anybody with borderline personality disorder can have a lot of anxiety, but specifically quiet borderlines tend to have even more anxiety and especially more social anxiety than people with acting out BPD or that presentation of it. So where was I? They self harm as well. People who act in, and perhaps in different ways, but it can be cutting, can be burning. It can be the same things as it is for the other side of BPD, so to speak, the other half people with BPD. I'm not saying it's 50-50, but just they can be impulsive. They suffer a lot of suicidal ideation, suicidal tendencies. They blame themselves so much. They feel everything bad is their fault more than throwing it out as it's your fault. Um, they often feel wrong. Um, you don't have to say anything or do anything. You just feel like they'll be wrong. Um, they feel unlovable. They feel unworthy. Sometimes, and they're not aware of all these feelings necessarily. Um, Sometimes they feel confident and then suddenly totally insecure, which is typical of borderline personality disorder in general, but in the quiet borderline as well. Um, they have a love-hate experience of people and splitting and idealization and devaluation. And that's basically, the approach avoidance, conflict, and borderline personality disorder experienced by the quiet borderline as well. They turn against themselves though. They hate themselves. I mean, all people with BPD will go through a period of self-hate that could last for years if they don't get help and treatment and learn how to change this. But the quiet borderline also suffers a lot of self-hatred. And whatever that means when you don't know who you are. It's usually what's known as the introjected, okay, so taken on as a young child, critical narrative of perhaps a very critical mother, or the perception of even a mother who's not being critical, the perception that they were critical, then interjecting this sort of like inner critic narrative that's all negative. That's what kind of brings the hate into the person with borderline personality disorder and the quiet borderline as well, even though they don't have a self to really contain that. So the people with quiet who have the quiet borderline personality disorder type of manifestation often are really the biggest deniers of having BPD, because they'll say, well, but I'm not like that. The classic acting out who's easy to spot. So, here's a really tragic and sad thing that I just know based on my own experience in working with clients that this is the case. And I've heard others professionals speak about it. I can't put my finger on a stat right now because I don't think they think about stats or statistics of this because maybe they measure the number of people. Well, they say 10% of people with BPD will commit suicide. I think that's a really lowball number. But the highest number of people with BPD who will successfully complete suicide, tragically enough and sadly enough, are the quiet borderlines. So that's another thing. They can be harder to spot, harder to get help because they're harder to spot, and more likely to turn everything inward in such a way as to become very suicidal and very hard to then change their way of thinking or mindset. And they just often commit suicide in ways that shock people because people might not have realized with this quiet presentation of borderline personality disorder that the person had borderline personality disorder, because not everybody who's a quiet borderline is diagnosed as often as those who are the acting out, raging type of borderline. So quiet borderline is mostly the manifestation of how they behave, how they act, how they put everything in instead of out. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that you'll stay tuned for the third video, or after a long time these videos have been up. Please know that this was preceded by, I don't know what the title will be right now, but something about the vulnerable narcissist and what does that mean, which, and then the video to follow after this one that you might want to watch the 3 in a row is what's the difference between a vulnerable narcissist, also known as a covert narcissist or an inverted narcissist, and a quiet borderline. Okay, so that's the next video coming up, and if you're watching these in a row, this would be the right way to watch them. So I hope that was helpful, and look for the next video coming up. A lot of people have these questions, and a lot of people are really lost after these relationship experiences, and or if you have a parent like this who's a quiet borderline, or an adult child who's a quiet borderline, or you were in a significant other relationship. It doesn't matter the type of relationship, the experience can be devastating in many ways because you can't reach that person and you're still feeling some things that people that are with acting out borderlines might feel, but you might not be understanding why this person is the way they are. They might not be identified as a borderline. It might take longer to identify the quiet borderline. Although with all the information online right now, hopefully my video helps a bit in adding to that. Maybe people are starting to know that much quicker, or suspect that much quicker, and then hopefully people are getting to be diagnosed. I mean, I guess the psychiatrists are good at the diagnosing, but again, my 2 cents worth is if somebody is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, even a quiet borderline, treatment is often best found away from psychiatry. Actual helpful treatment. Just it's the way I recovered myself over 4 years ago now, and it's a way to recover without meds if you're interested. Anyway, take care, and for those who have BPD, and I hope that was helpful to people who are, you know, have had an experience with somebody who was a quiet borderline, and you're like kind of confused and trying to figure out, what was that about? Because they don't seem like they're quote borderline because they're quiet, acting in, turning it all in, but they are the ones who loved ones know give the silent treatment, but not in a sense that they sit there and go, "Oh, I'm going to give you the silent treatment now," because often it's subconscious. They're just so inside, feeling so terrible, hurting so much that it's not always as intentional as it seems. Take care now.